Hello, welcome to the second part to my animation tips. So just like the first part, I have a couple of things that I wanted to share that I think is useful. The things I want to talk about are split into chapters at the bottom of this video. So let's open up a timeline that I have. And okay, let's move it to the top. And right now you can see like I've placed a bazillion cameras in this scene. And each one of these cameras are represented along the timeline as this. So they represent the length of a shot and when one shot starts and ends. So this camera starts here and then it stops here because then this camera overlaps with this one. So then it switches to this camera. So if you want cameras to cut between each other instead of transition between each other, so if I select all of the cameras and then select smooth transition, it will be a very different sequence because then the camera will smoothly transition between every single shot and it looks very weird. So by default, Dreams is set to a smooth transition. So if you want to get rid of that, you just select cut, and then each shot will cut directly to the next camera. But what if you're animating the characters and you have a whole bunch of cameras blocking the way? There is a useful show and hide tab. So you click on that and then click on the lights of cameras. You can hide all of the cameras and then just scrub through the animation and focus on the animation. Another problem that you might encounter, like when you're scrubbing through an animation, are all the keyframes averaging out in Dreams. So therefore you get weird stuff like this because Dreams runs in real time and the keyframes have very special kinds of properties where it averages out with each other. You'll get really strange stuff like this. You might go, oh my god, what have I done? But if you go into the solo, you click on that, they will then go into a more normal kind of looking state. Okay, so something else that I found useful is, let's say you're doing an animation and then midway through you just want to preview something that you're working on. So this is shot 17 where John Wick smashes his head into some glass, but you can't really tell the exact timing when you're playing back in here. You can only tell when you're actually inside the play mode to see the final result. But I just want to focus on that particular shot, but it plays from the very beginning. I just want the playhead to play from that specific shot. So there is a trim start tool that you can use. So you can kind of drag it to the spot that you're working on. So let's drag it to 17. And there's also an end slider. And I'll drag it to the area that I'm working on. So now when I press play, it'll just focus on that section and lets me kind of review what the shot looks like when it's finalized. A quicker way to do it, if you press triangle to reset the trim start and the trim end, if you hold L1, L3, it will automatically snap that trim start to wherever the imp is highlighting. So if I want it to trim here, I just go L1 R3 for the trim end, and it'll snap to those points. So if you don't know the shortcuts, if you hover over the timeline for a little bit, there are prompts that appear around the imp, and it's the one on the bottom left. Something else that is useful when you're animating, sometimes you don't want to accidentally move stuff around, so there is a tool under Tools called Freeze, and it's pretty much the equivalent to locking your layers in Photoshop or in Autodesk Maya, so anything that is highlighted in blue and then go into move, you can now not move the thing. So these things, they cannot move, and that's extremely useful when you're dealing with multiple elements in the scene. There's also the hide option. So if you want to, say, animate from this angle, but then this thing's in the way, you can temporarily hide these things, so that then you can animate from that angle. And speaking of angles, you can also use the bookmark options. So if, say, I'm working on, let's solo this out so it looks normal. Let's say I'm working on this shot, which is, by the way, the most complex shot in the entire animation. I just want to focus on these characters, but when I press play and then go into edit mode, the camera is a bit too far away. So what I can do is zoom in to the action and then create a bookmark. So then when I animate it, I can quickly press on the bookmark to preview the angle. And you can do multiple bookmarks around the scene to different kinds of things that you need to work with. Something else that is extremely useful when I was animating is flipping through the animation. So in traditional animation, when the Disney animators were drawing on paper, you would place your fingers between the pages and kind of flip through it to see what's happening. You can kind of do the same thing in Dreams as well, and it's not just the scrub function, but when you're animating, you can just focus on the character by hiding everything else. And then if you want to use a light box, you can turn on studio lighting, so you can actually see the character better. So then you can focus on things like silhouette, the lines of action, and whether it's looking good from that particular angle that you're working on. And if you hover over the timeline again, you will see prompts around the imp, and a really useful prompt is the L1 right D-pad, which is the next frame. So if you press L1 and then go right, you can do something very similar to how the Disney animators flip through pages, except you're not flipping through pages, you're flipping through something that is three-dimensional in space. So you can flip back and forth, flip through, check whether the motion is working, and then change anything that feels out of place. Something else that I find useful as well, like sometimes you want to have onion skinning, and there is really no onion skinning in Dreams. The closest that we have are these, like you can kind of see the last point and the end point. But if you want something more detailed, what you can do is position a whole bunch of these characters around. and then I need him to look a certain way on this frame. So you can kind of block it out like this just to get an idea. And then what you can do is convert these puppets to a painting. And then under here, you can change the opacity as a guide on how you want to do it. And with the cloning that you can do, you can also kind of figure out the arc of the motion and the spacing, and then alter the spacing a little bit. So when it comes to animating, all you got to do really is just put the character through that kind of motion and kind of like make him move along that path. Other things you can do in Dreams, since it's running in real time, is the action recorder has an action mode to kind of plot out the timing. If you have trouble with timing, you can use the action recorder in action mode and kind of plan out when something needs to hit something. So then when you play back, you have a point of reference to keyframe along to. Okay, so moving on to the next topic, which is IK and FK. So IK stands for inverse kinematics and FK stands for forward kinematics. They are two completely different ways of animating limbs. So how do you even get IK or FK in the first place? Well, this is how. So if you want inverse kinematics, what you do is hold R2 on the hand and then move it, which is a translation. So when you translate the hand, it will be inverse kinematics. But if you rotate it with L2, rotate instead of translate, that will be forward kinematics. If you click on the hand now, it'll say IK to FK. So this one is IK, and then if you click on this one, it'll say FK to IK, which means this one is a forward kinematic hand. So now you can't really move this hand, it will only rotate. So if you want to animate this hand interacting with the wall with FK, it will be extremely difficult to do that. Because now if you move the hip, his hand is going to move straight through the wall like Neo from the Matrix. In this case, if you want the hand to push against the wall, you want to use inverse kinematics, so R2 to translate the hand. Place the hand there. And now, if you move the puppet, his hand will stay in place. Now, this one, I don't want that to be inverse kinematics anymore. So I might deanimate this and then move and rotate this hand. So now, when you move the body, this hand will move the way you want it to, and then this one will move the way you want it to as well. So yeah, inverse kinematics is good when interacting with the environment, like a wall or something like that. So you might be wondering, why do we even animate using FK in the first place? Well, if you animate with inverse kinematics, inverse kinematics will move in a straight line. You can add an in-between to influence an arc, but there is an easy way to get the arc by converting it to an FK. To convert it to FK, you just edit the keyframe by L1X, click on the hand, and then convert it to FK by pressing this button. And then on the next frame, also convert it to FK. So now when you play back, there's more of an arc kind of motion. This is how you do an in-between. So if you want it to be IK, you can add an in-between key like this and just move it. Then L1X this one, convert it to IK, convert this one to IK, and then what you can do is move this in-between key in between both points A and B, create a blend between it, and now you got an arc happening. The feet also work in the same way, so if you L2 on the feet, it converts it to FK. So now if you move the foot around, his foot will go through the floor. So yeah. Okay, so for the last section, I'm going to talk about eases and springiness. So right now we have the Roadrunner from Wile E. Coyote, and if you press play right now, he will do this, which is something that we don't want. So what you do is if you add a blend by L1X between the keyframes, he will move, but it still doesn't look believable. Right now the problem is he moves and then he just snaps back to the original position. So we can either extend the keyframe by hovering over it and then pressing up and down to resize it. So now when it plays, he will stop. Another way we can keep the Roadrunner in place is by keeping changes. So now when you press play, it will always stay in that position, which is kind of like what we want. So this is pretty boring at the moment because it moves very linear. So what we can do is change like the ease. So if we go L1X on the ease, it will ease out. It's really subtle, but it starts slow and then speeds up and then halts. We can increase the intensity of that. If we look carefully on the line, you can see like if it's kind of straight and linear, the pattern on the line will kind of indicate the spacing. So if we go all the way up like this, you can kind of see how it affects the spacing of the path. So now it will start off really slow and then speed up and then stop. But that kind of looks a bit weird. Like the Roadrunner has overshooting and follow through. So a quick way to add follow through to this motion is by scoping into the last frame and then adding springiness. So if you go all the way, yeah, you don't want to overdo it because it'll look like he's sliding across the road. So if you make it subtle, like around 50 or something, it looks and feels much more believable. So yeah, that's overshooting with the springiness, but if you want it to be much more like the Looney Tunes style, then I would duplicate some of these keys like this. And then this one can kind of move forward like this. This one can move back like this. A little bit forward, and then it'll settle back into this. So now when we play it, we can also increase and play around with the springiness to get the kind of that wobble at the end. If we make it the opposite direction like this, it will look really weird. yeah, you have to be really specific with how you adjust the curves and the springiness amount to get like the kind of movement that you want. So um, that is easing and springiness. Everything that I've been talking about with the regular timeline and the regular keyframes, we can also do with an action recorder as well. So I'll quickly do the same thing. So I'll place a frame here. Except when you're scrubbing through something with the action recorder, you have to tap on the touchpad, go to the frame number, which is like 13, and then move him across. And inside the action recorder, you can do the same thing. You can adjust the eases like this, and at the end of it, to add springiness, you just press up and down to adjust the springiness. So now if I turn off this timeline and it just runs from the action recorder, it's kind of like the same. And to edit the keyframes is just like an extra step of scoping into the action recorder like this. And then you can adjust it the way you would as though it was like a regular timeline. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover in this video. And you know what? I think that's all, folks.